Some mornings you wake up and feel an ache that has no name, not a pain of the body but of the soul, a quiet emptiness that trails you from room to room like a shadow that refuses to leave. You look around your life and everything seems intact, but something inside feels fractured, as if a part of you never quite arrived. You sip your coffee in silence, staring out the window, wondering why the people who were supposed to love you the most always seemed to misunderstand you the deepest. You can't explain it, but the hollowness in your chest tells a story. It is one that begins long before adulthood, in the very roots of where you came from. You were born into a family, yes, but not one that felt like home. Instead, it felt like a storm you never asked to weather. And yet, here you are. Still standing, still searching, still feeling far more than most. Carl Jung once said that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what he didn't leave out, and what few dare to admit, is that for some, that becoming begins in the rubble. In households where warmth was scarce, the truth had to be hidden just to survive. For those who carry a strong and sensitive soul, the path is rarely simple. The awakening doesn't begin with light. It begins with fire, with conflict, with confusion, with the unbearable feeling of being a stranger in your own family. You weren't broken for being different. You were born to be. Jung believed that the soul speaks through symbols, and often its first language is suffering. That ache you feel, the one no one else in your family seems to understand, is not weakness. It's initiation. It's the call to awaken through contrast, through the pain of misalignment, and through the silent inner knowing that you were meant for something more. Not more success, not more perfection, but more truth, more depth, more connection to what is real. When you're born into a toxic family system, it can feel like you've been cursed. But what if it's the exact opposite? What if it's a sacred assignment? What if the very chaos you endured was preparing you, not punishing you, to become someone who could transmute generational pain into healing and illusion into wisdom? Those with strong souls often emerge from the most fractured beginnings, not because they are flawed, but because their soul chose to enter the fire early, to know its heat, to learn its language, and to one day walk others through it. This isn't spiritual romanticism. It is an archetypal truth. The seed of transformation lies buried not in harmony, but in tension. And if you spent your whole life wondering why you felt out of place in the very family that raised you, perhaps it's time to consider this. Maybe you weren't meant to fit in. Maybe you were meant to awaken first. The wound was never your identity. It was your threshold. And now, as you begin to trace that pain back to its origin, you'll find it was never there to define you. It was there to refine you. There is a particular kind of ache that forms in the soul of a child who learns early that love is conditional, not because they are unlovable, but because the environment around them cannot hold what they carry. When your voice is silenced, when your joy is dismissed, when your sensitivity is framed as weakness or inconvenience, a quiet fracture forms in your spirit. Not loud enough to break you, but deep enough to change the shape of your becoming. You begin to navigate life through an inner maze of questions. Is it safe to feel this much? Am I wrong for seeing what others deny? Should I take the blame? These questions do not come from a place of weakness. They come from a soul already wrestling with its calling. Jung once wrote that the shadow is not just the dark part of us. It is the hidden part, the unclaimed self waiting beneath rejection and shame. In many families, the shadow doesn't live in just one person. It permeates the system, passed down through silence, denial, and generational pain. And if you're the one who sees it, if you're the one who feels it when others numb it away, then you are the one carrying the torch through the darkness. Not because you wanted to, because your soul remembered what others forgot. There was a woman named Elise who once described her childhood as living in a house with locked doors, not literal ones, but emotional ones. Her mother never raised her voice, but her love felt like a transaction. Her father was present in the room, but absent from her life. No one ever told her not to cry. But when she did, the room grew colder, like her emotions were something to be ashamed of. For years, she tried to win their affection by becoming the perfect daughter. High grades, polite silence, emotional self-erasure. And it worked, for a while. On the outside, she was thriving. But inside, a quiet hunger grew. Not for attention, but for truth. After years of living this double life, Elise found herself staring at the ceiling one morning, unable to move. Not from laziness, but from soul fatigue. She realized she had built her identity around surviving others' discomfort, not around honoring her own depth. That day didn't spark a revolution, but it cracked something open. She began journaling not for productivity, but to remember her voice. She walked barefoot in the woods just to feel something real. She didn't seek revenge or blame. She sought reunion with the parts of herself she had buried to stay safe. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic, but it was hers. A quiet unfolding, a remembering. This is what Jung meant when he said that what you need will be found where you least want to look. The family that wounded you also gave you the raw material for awakening. Their shadows became the canvas for your light. Their blindness became the mirror for your vision. You are not meant to carry their burdens, but you are invited to alchemize them, to step out of the roles you were assigned and into the truth you came to live. Not to fix the family, not to be the savior, but to become whole. And wholeness does not mean perfection. It means remembering what the world asked you to forget. Your essence. That strange and beautiful fire that still flickers inside you, waiting for the moment you say, I see you. I'm ready. There comes a point in every awakening soul's journey where survival strategies begin to collapse. Not because they failed, but because you outgrew them. The armor you built in childhood, people-pleasing, silence, perfectionism, or self-erasure, once kept you safe, but now feels suffocating. What once shielded you has become the very thing blocking your truth. This inner unraveling is not a sign of regression, but the beginning of rebirth. Jung taught that the path to individuation requires the dismantling of inherited identities, and there is no mask more difficult to remove than the one you had to wear just to be loved. When your family only accepted a version of you that was small, obedient, or emotionally muted, you learned to dim your soul just to stay within the orbit of their approval. But awakening means daring to disappoint those who never truly saw you. Daniel, a quiet, introspective man in his 40s, spent most of his life molding himself into who his father needed him to be. A logical, hard-working provider who never cried, never questioned, and never spoke of his dreams. As a boy, he remembered once sharing that he wanted to paint, only to be met with laughter and a comment that men don't waste time on such things. So he buried his colors, his longing, his softness. He built a life that looked respectable, even admirable, but inside he was haunted by a silence he couldn't explain, until one day his daughter came to him crying, holding a broken watercolor painting she had made. And something cracked open. He held her, not with words, but with the ache of a lifetime of unexpressed tenderness. That night, he found his old brushes. They were stiff and unused for decades, but they were still waiting like his soul. He began painting again, not to become an artist, but to remember himself. His hands shook. His heart didn't. In those quiet moments with canvas and color, he wasn't performing, he was returning. And that's the invitation toxic families unknowingly extend to the strong soul, to remember yourself through contrast. To see the shape of your essence by the way it was once disfigured, to reclaim your emotional truth, not by fighting your past, but by refusing to abandon your present self for its sake. You don't awaken because they apologize. You awaken because your soul refuses to stay quiet any longer. This is the power of inner work. It doesn't change what happened, but it changes what those wounds get to mean. In that re-meaning, you liberate not just yourself, but the generations that came before you and those that will come after. This is not defiance. It is devotion. Devotion to the self that Jung believed was always present, always whole, always waiting to be chosen, not by the world, but by you. There is a sacred grief that only the scapegoat understands, the grief of being exiled not for doing wrong, but for daring to be real. In families built on illusion, truth-tellers are seen as threats. The moment you stop playing the role they gave you and start speaking from your soul, you are met not with curiosity, but with rejection. This is not because your truth is wrong, but because it rattles the illusions others still need to survive. Carl Jung understood that the soul's awakening often begins with separation, with a deep rupture between who we were told to be and who we truly are. And this rupture, though lonely, is what makes room for something truer to emerge. You were not cast out, you were called out into your becoming. Consider Maya, a woman in her early 50s who always carried the weight of her family's peace. From the time she was a child, she was the fixer, the listener, the one who absorbed everyone else's storms while quietly silencing her own. Her mother would say things like, "You're the strong one," every time Maya tried to express pain, as if her strength was a shield that exempted her from needing care. For decades, she played her part flawlessly, until one day, her body began to unravel. Fatigue, anxiety, and a chronic tension in her chest that no doctor could explain. The healer she eventually visited asked her a single question that broke her open. Whose peace have you been sacrificing yourself for? That night, alone in her car, she wept not for what she had lost, but for what she had never been allowed to need. It was the beginning of her return, not just to her body, but to her right to exist as someone other than the family's foundation. To awaken from these roles is an act of profound inner rebellion. It is to remember that being needed is not the same as being loved. That holding others together while you fall apart is not strength. It is self-abandonment. Jung believed that healing happens not by escaping our story, but by facing it so fully that we change its meaning. When you stop needing to be seen as the strong one, the good one, the responsible one, you begin to be seen as something far more real, yourself. And it is this realness, raw, imperfect, radiant, that begins to shift the generational script. You do not heal your family by fixing them. You heal your lineage by freeing yourself from the patterns that kept everyone pretending. The cost of awakening is often loneliness, but the gift is liberation. And as you begin to walk in truth rather than illusion, your very presence becomes a light others didn't know they needed. You stop being the scapegoat and become the mirror. Not to shame them, but to remind them of what's possible when a soul chooses truth over tradition. But what happens when the light within you begins to shine in a room that still worships the dark? When you start to heal, to soften, to expand beyond the old family patterns, you may notice something deeply disorienting. Your freedom doesn't always inspire applause. In fact, it often invites resistance. The more you grow, the more those still trapped in illusion may lash out, not because you have done them harm, but because your presence disrupts the carefully constructed narrative they still need to believe. This is the paradox of awakening within a family system built on survival roles. Your liberation feels like betrayal to those who remain entangled in the script. Carl Jung warned that individuation, the path to becoming one's true self, often leads first to exile before it brings belonging. For many, this exile begins not in society, but around the family dinner table. Take David, a quiet man in his 40s who spent decades living in the mold his parents had set for him. He was agreeable, dependable, emotionally reserved, the golden child who never made waves. But something inside him began to stir after the loss of his father. Grief opened a door he had spent his whole life avoiding, and what he found on the other side was not just sorrow, but a self that had been waiting patiently for decades. He started therapy, began painting again, and moved to a smaller home where he felt peace for the first time in years. But when he told his mother he didn't want to take over the family business, her silence cut deeper than any words. She called him selfish. His siblings said he was changing too much. But for David, the real shift was internal. He told me, I didn't leave them. I just finally returned to myself. This is the invisible cost of spiritual growth. The moment you realize that becoming who you are may mean letting go of who they wanted you to be. It is not cruelty that compels you to break the mold, but truth. Your growth does not insult them, but it may confront them, and in that confrontation, they may project their own fear of change onto you. This is why staying rooted in your inner knowing is not an act of rebellion, but of survival. Your path is not meant to make sense to everyone. It is meant to resonate deeply within you. Jung understood that the soul has its own compass, and that the more aligned you become with your true self, the less external validation you will require. The wind may blow, the voices may rise, but the soul that walks in its own rhythm no longer flinches. You are not here to be understood by those still committed to misunderstanding themselves. You are here to embody the frequency of truth, even when it is inconvenient, especially then, because it is in those moments when you choose integrity over inclusion, peace over performance, that you stop living for acceptance and begin living as yourself. And in doing so, you become the invitation others didn't know they needed. The quiet, unwavering proof that another way is possible. Still, even with your boundaries, your rituals, your soul survival gear, there are days when it all feels heavier than words can reach. These are the days when you wake up with a lump in your throat for no clear reason, when your chest tightens at the sound of familiar voices, or when your heart aches in the presence of people who should feel at home but never have. This is the silent grief of awakening, the realization that what once passed for love was often a quiet form of control, that what you were taught to call normal was really the scaffolding of suppression. Carl Jung wrote that the greatest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of the parent, and many strong souls carry this invisible weight. You may feel the pull to rescue them, to explain yourself, to prove that your growth is not rebellion but necessity. But healing does not ask for performance, it asks for presence. Take the story of Alina, who spent most of her adult life trying to be the bridge between her mother's bitterness and her own longing for connection. Every holiday felt like walking on emotional glass. She tried everything: empathy, silence, gifts, spiritual bypassing, even shrinking herself to avoid conflict. But nothing softened the sharpness in the room. Until one winter evening, sitting in her car after another tense dinner, she realized something that changed her forever. I was trying to be the daughter my mother wanted, but I had never asked if that version of me even existed. That night she stopped performing and started choosing. She still loved her mother, but from a distance that protected her peace. Her healing didn't require her family's permission, it required her soul's alignment. This is where transformation deepens, when you no longer confuse guilt with loyalty, when you stop mistaking proximity for love. Jung taught that individuation requires separation before integration. The process of becoming your true self cannot happen while trapped in the roles others wrote for you. And yet, it is precisely through this shedding that your sacred identity begins to rise. You are not meant to carry what broke them. You are meant to break the cycle by honoring what awakens you. This does not make you heartless. It makes you whole. The more you root yourself in truth, the less you will need others to validate your path. Your peace is the proof. Your clarity is the prayer. And your ability to love without losing yourself is the quiet revolution your lineage has been waiting for. Real healing does not come from changing them. It comes from choosing yourself. And now, if you have arrived at this point, with your heart still beating beneath the weight of what was never meant for you, let that be the proof. Proof that no storm was strong enough to silence your spirit, that no voice, no rejection, no history of misunderstanding could erase the quiet knowing you carry inside. Because the greatest rebellion is not rage, but presence. Not escape, but embodiment. Not perfection, but the willingness to rise again without needing applause. This path was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering what has always lived in you, the resilience of the soul, the clarity born through chaos, the sacred refusal to abandon yourself in order to be loved. You were never broken. You were being refined by fire, by silence, by the weight of generational stories that were never yours to keep. And each time you chose to stay awake rather than numb, each time you said yes to the truth, even when it cost you comfort, you were becoming what this world needs more of. Real, awake, whole people who carry light not because they were spared the dark, but because they learned how to burn clean in the middle of it. There is something profoundly holy in choosing yourself in a world that profits off your doubt. There is quiet power in the one who no longer begs to be seen because they have finally seen themselves. And perhaps that is the essence of being chosen. Not being better, but being willing. Willing to feel everything, willing to lose illusions. Willing to break the trance of people-pleasing and self-erasure that once passed for survival. Carl Jung knew that the soul does not grow through comfort, but through the confrontation of what is unconscious. And you, dear reader, have done what many never dare. You looked into the eyes of your lineage, your patterns, your pain, and said, "This ends with me." That is not weakness. That is sacred lineage work. That is spiritual adulthood. So let this be your closing breath in this chapter, not as an end, but as a return to your own rhythm. A return to the knowing that you do not have to explain yourself to those who have not done their own inner excavation. A return to the deeper home that lives within you, where peace is not dependent on approval, where truth is not negotiable, and where love no longer means sacrifice. And in this return, may you remember that your path was never about the family that raised you, but the soul that chose this incarnation. Your origins do not define your worth. Your story does not end where the pain began. The roots may have been buried in chaos, but the bloom was always inevitable. So, rise, not because you are trying to prove something, but because rising is what your soul came here to do. Rise quietly, steadily, wildly. Rise in your art, in your stillness, in your love, that no longer leaks through wounds, but flows from wholeness. Rise knowing that the strength you now embody was forged through fire you never deserved. Yet you overcame. And when the world feels heavy again, when the past taps on your shoulder with its old grief, don't fight it. Don't shrink. Just pause, breathe, and remember, the light is not out there. It has always been you. You are not healing into someone new. You are returning to someone ancient. Someone radiant, someone free. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this, when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, Let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.